right, just getting a few things set up here, and then we'll get going as people continue to filter in. Looks like people are joining rather quickly here. Good deal. All right, well, we'll go ahead and jump right into it. First of all, thanks for joining us tonight. This is our first time doing this webinar, so we hope you find it interesting and hopefully fairly useful. Our kind of impetus behind this specific webinar is turkeys have a very unique ecology and biology, and we as hunters can really utilize an understanding of habitat selection, understanding of the bird itself, and understanding of its behaviors and its courtship behaviors so that we can better plan our strategies for spring hunting. And so that's kind of the impetus behind this. And you'll hear as we go through some of these research papers that we found and that we're going to highlight, we'll kind of reiterate it and kind of point it back to being a hunter. But if you have any questions throughout the webinar tonight, please utilize the chat down below. We want this webinar to be as engaging as possible. So you guys asking questions or follow-up questions will certainly make it a lot more of a productive webinar and a lot more enjoyable for us. So feel free to ask questions throughout. Your cameras and mics are disabled just to allow for a nice clean environment tonight. But again, if you have any questions throughout, drop them in the chat and we will address those as we go forward. One quick other reminder. This webinar is being recorded, so if you happen to need to leave early or if you want to recatch, maybe you wanted to hear something again, we will put the full recording on YouTube in the coming days, and we will send that out to all registrants of this webinar. So be on the lookout for that in the coming days. But with that, we'll go ahead and kind of jump right into it. So our presenters tonight are going to be myself, Dan Stevens, and then we have Curtis Twellman joining us tonight. So Curtis, if you want to say hello.
Hello, everybody.
Perfect. And we'll just jump right into it. So I'm going to turn it over to Curtis, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about turkey taxonomy to kind of set the stage so we kind of know what the heck these birds are.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So, a little bit of turkey taxonomy. So, that's just the classifications of these little feathered beasts that we like to go after in the spring and in the fall, but especially in the spring because that's what makes turkey special. Is we have that special spring season to take advantage of their breeding ecology, but here's where they come from. Obviously, you know it's an animal. You know it's a chordata. It's got a backbone, so it's a subphylum vertebrata. You should know that it's in class Aves because it is a bird. And despite some popular misnomers, turkeys can fly. Now, do they soar through the air like a dove? Absolutely not. But they do fly up and down out of roost trees each and every night, and they can definitely fly away from danger. So, class Aves, order Galliformes. This is our gallinaceous birds. So, we've got a picture of a number of those over in the right hand corner of this picture, and that's everything from turkeys, chuckers, pheasants, all the way to our peacocks. Now, the family and subfamily is where we get down into the Phasianidae, and this is the same family as the pheasants. So turkeys are in that family. And then the top tribe is Tetraonini. May not be saying that right, but that is the same tribe as the grouse. So if you're looking at what bird is most closely related to our wild turkey, it is the grouse, probably the ruffed grouse, also the sage grouse, but they're both going to be in that same tribe. But then we get to the genus, which is Meleagris, and that is going to be the type genus for turkey. So that is our eastern wild turkey is going to be the only representative. And if you go to the complete species name, which is binomial, it's Meleagris. Galapavo is our eastern wild turkey. And then each subspecies will have a subspecies epithet onto that as well. But that's kind of where our wild turkey sits in terms of the animal kingdom and in the class Aves birds. Now we got to talk about the different subspecies. So if you've joined us on any of our Turkey Hunting 101 or 102, we kind of talk about this. There's some special designations in the hunting world, like the Grand Slam or the Super Slam, that deals with the different subspecies of turkeys. Well, we just so happen to have four readily available subspecies here in North America, and we've got five just barely. So the four that we definitively have are, of course, the most widely distributed is the eastern subspecies, which is what we have all over Illinois and over the vast majority of the eastern United States. This is the most numerous bird in the countryside, the most popular one to hunt, and the one we're most familiar with. The one that's considered the toughest to call in is the Osceola or the Florida turkey, which is the smallest of the subspecies and just occurs in Florida. So you see him down there all by his lonesome, surrounded by the eastern wild turkey, of course. Now, if you start moving to the west, you get into the Central Valley of Texas and up into Oklahoma and Nebraska. We got the Rio Grande subspecies, and they kind of make up the central portion of the country there. You're going to find some yellow portions, especially up in Nebraska where hybridization occurs. This is primarily going to be hybrids between the Rio Grandes and usually Easterns because they're more plentiful, the ones that they put out there. But the range that overlaps is going to be our more mountain-esque turkey, which is going to be Merriam's that we get kind of all throughout the mountains of the west there. You see the fifth species that just kind of barely makes it in. You see it there going through Mexico, and it barely comes into the little corner of Arizona, maybe a little bit into New Mexico, and that would be the Goulds. This is another mountain species of wild turkey, and this is the biggest subspecies, but this is undoubtedly the toughest to get, obviously, because the range is very narrow within the United States. Obviously, in Mexico, you can go down there and get them. And then if you go a little bit down further into Central America, Yucatan Peninsula, you can find this is a different species now, but that's the ocellated turkey. Looks like a whole different beast. And here in this next slide, we will see pictures of all of these beasts. There they all are, and you see all the subspecies of the normal wild turkey. They look pretty similar. The differences between those is pretty minimal. The eastern wild turkeys got kind of buffy bands, whereas on the Merriams and the Osceolas, those bands might be a little bit lighter colored, and for the most part, that's going to make up a lot of the distinguishing characteristics. Now, there's lots of small differences between these birds, but the best way to tell them apart is where is it at, what habitat is it in. You don't have to worry about any of that in Illinois, though, because all of our birds are just the eastern wild turkey, which is, hey, nothing, there's no shame there. It's considered one of the most difficult to hunt, a very we'll talk about all their basically superpowers that they have to evade predation. So when you go out and you're a successful turkey hunter, you've really done something. And then of course the ocellated turkey looks quite a bit different than all the other subspecies. So if you're really looking for an adventure hunt, I would suggest looking into going after one of those things because that's going to be I couldn't even imagine. I feel like I could imagine hunts for all the subspecies of wild turkey that we have. But for the ocellated turkey, that's a whole nother thing. I've never, a whole new ball game. Couldn't even imagine it. So if anybody ever does that, let us know about it. We'd love to hear. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dan to talk about. Obviously, this is near and dear to our hearts that we didn't always have a great population of turkeys here in Illinois. Like, that's hard to believe.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think a lot of people don't realize, especially with when we talk hunting, specifically in Illinois, deer and turkey hunting are a relatively kind of new phenomenon. This isn't something that's been going on for centuries in Illinois. We basically lost all of our deer and all of our turkey, and it's such especially the wild turkey recovery is such a conservation success story that highlights collaboration, that highlights science, and that really highlights the importance of putting habitat back on the ground, that now we have these populations to hunt. So we're just going to really quickly go through this kind of timeline because I think it really sets the stage and really highlights how important these birds are and how we almost lost turkey completely. They were essentially extirpated from the state by the 1903, the Illinois General Assembly basically banned the hunting season for wild turkeys, and that was just due to population declines, and that was largely due to the logging trade, agriculture at the time. We lost a lot of our really mature forest, which as we go through and talk about habitat later on in this webinar tonight, you'll start to realize how, I don't want to say how needy wild turkey are, but they are very specific. They have specific habitat needs. They're not a generalist like some of our other wildlife species. And so it was really important to put that habitat back on the ground, both in terms of managing the habitat, but also in many cases reestablishing that habitat that had been just completely lost. And so as we transitioned through the 1910, they basically were declared completely non-existent in the states. We didn't have a single turkey. And just think that was only 100 and what, 15 years ago. And now every time I'm out in the woods hunting, I either see or hear turkey or see turkey sign or something like that. So really, really cool success story. And the way that this is the kind of wildlife history that I really fall in love with. And so the first trial at getting wild turkey back on the landscape was using pen raised birds. So these were turkey that were pen reared, grown up in pens, and they tried to release them and see if they could use that as kind of their source population to then begin expanding the wild turkey population back in Illinois. What they found essentially was these birds just had very little survival instinct, and that initial stocking really didn't work. And so they took heed of that, and throughout the late 1950s and through 67, they actually went to other states and said, "Hey, can we trade you for some turkey?" And there's mixed there's mixed reports on what exactly they traded for the turkey, but in some cases, I think with Arkansas, I believe they actually traded largemouth bass. So Arkansas needed some new genes in their largemouth bass population in some of their lakes, and so we sent them some largemouth bass. They sent us some wild turkey back, and that was kind of the original stocking. And so it's really interesting to think our Illinois turkey actually all came from Arkansas, Mississippi, and West Virginia. And obviously, if you're familiar with the geography of Illinois, especially at the time, the vast majority of really contiguous, mature forest habitat that turkeys needed to thrive was in the Shawnee National Forest. And so that was kind of the main area that they really started stocking these birds. And by 1970, there was actually enough turkey back on the landscape because turkeys reproduce fairly quickly that they could reopen a hunting season. And so we had our first hunting season for wild turkey in 1970. So again, really, really not that long ago, especially in the grand scheme of things. And between 1970 and 2000, they didn't just let this initial stocking and just hope that it would kind of naturally spread across the landscape. What they did is they actually went back in, trapped a few of these turkeys from the Shawnee National Forest, and started transporting them around the state. So then they could kind of create these other source populations that would again continue to expand and continue to really build out that population. And it didn't take long at all for that turkey population to naturally expand into all 102 counties. And this little chart I wanted to show here, this is from the Illinois DNR spring turkey report that they put out every year that basically shows overall harvest, age of harvest. There's a lot of really good data in there, but I wanted to just show the totality of harvest. So think back, 1970 was our first hunting season. And now we have over 16,000 birds harvested on average every spring. And obviously there's some statistical noise and some annual fluctuations year to year, but I think that really does highlight how far we've come. Again, 100 years ago, there was not a single turkey in this state. And I will drop a quick link in the chat. There's a really excellent article in the Outdoor Illinois Journal. If you're not following that website, I really recommend you doing so. They put out a lot of really good articles every year that are oftentimes written by DNR staff, written by biologists, written by different Illinois outdoor media. Curtis and I routinely publish an article there every issue. But they had a really good article that they published, basically detailing this entire timeline of the turkey repopulation. It was written by Kathy Andrews Wright, who's kind of the main editor over there. But if you're interested in reading more about that and going more in depth, I dropped a link in the chat, so you can quickly save that or open it to read later. And then with that, I'll quickly throw it back to Curtis to talk over some anatomy.
Yeah, so a little bit of turkey anatomy. First off, the name turkey. Did you ever think about where does that even come from? Does it mean something? Well, according to Wikipedia, the name turkey actually comes from way, way long time ago when in Europe they first started importing guinea fowl from Africa, which is not the same as our turkey, but they do look kind of similar. And at the time, the first country that was importing these birds into Europe was Turkey. And so they started calling the males turkey cocks and the hens turkey hens. And that stuck when they, eventually came to America and started naming stuff. That's where turkey came from. So, anyway, pretty interesting, and it's a pretty interesting looking critter. I guess some people say the face only a mother can love, right? They're delicious. They taste a lot better than they look, so at least there's that. But they've got a lot going on there, and some of this terminology is going to be the same with all birds. Tail feathers; those are going to be called your rectrices. Your wing feathers are going to be remiges, and generally what we find are primary wing feathers. And in a lot of cases, you can tell the age and the sex of the bird just by finding feathers. So we'll talk about that a little bit further on. But once we get to the head and also on the feet, obviously they've got, at least with the males, they've got the spur on the back of their legs that they can use for fighting. They'll actually throw their feet and fight each other. Vicious razor blades on them. Dan actually carries a scar from a turkey spur on his wrist. So if you see us at a workshop sometime, you can ask him about the time he had hand-to-hand battle with one of these little dinosaurs,
And I
and
lost.
and he lost. So, but it's the head that's really obviously got a lot going on here, and a lot of this is actually responsive to what's going on with the bird physiologically. So when we get into the spring, these birds' hormones are really going up through the charts. Okay, and we're starting to get into this time period now. We're not quite there, but as these days get warmer and warmer, these birds are going to be getting more and more excited. And as they get more and more excited, their head, all of these caruncles, these major caruncles and wattles and snoods, these get engorged with blood and turn all sorts of vibrant colors. Much more vibrant than, these turkeys are already colorful in the fall and winter, but in the spring that gets taken up a notch, and you're going to see some super bright reds, blues, and whites. And some of this is even color changing, depends on how excited or how nervous they are at the time. That a lot of times the first thing that I see when a bird is coming into me is the white crown, and it is so bright white that it's usually the first thing I see, and it almost looks like somebody's carrying a mirror and they're trying to signal me, like a signal mirror, like they're lost, they got a broken leg. A lot of times that's the first thing I see.
It really
And
is amazing how much that stands out. You can see it across a field hundreds of yards away. It really does stand out.
For sure. And it's even given me problems as a photographer when I've tried to take pictures of turkeys, and I'm like, oh man, this is a great shot. The reflection off of the dome is so much that it can wash out your picture. So, yeah, definitely a lot of stuff going on here, but that's one of my favorite ways. Obviously, in the spring, we are shooting bearded birds, which most of the time is going to be a male, is going to be a tom. Now, not 100% of the time, there are like 0.08% of hens that are bearded hens, but most of the time that's going to be a male bird. And when I see a bird coming in, and obviously this one's in a semi strut, but when I see those bright reds and whites in the head, I know, all right, it's game on. This is a gobbler coming in. This is probably a legal bird. So um, now, size is turkeys are one of the birds that their difference between the sexes size wise. So males are noticeably larger. You see here that males average anywhere from 12 to 25 pounds, and hens are at 6 to 12 pounds. So really noticeably smaller. Now, jakes are going to be what we call our immature toms. That's going to be kind of the young of the year that have a beard that just kind of barely sticks straight out. You can barely see it there. They're going to be the ones that are going to be towards that 12-pound range. And then once you get your 2 and 3 year old birds, they're going to get up to that 25-pound range. So the beard will continue to grow throughout the turkey's life. The beard is actually just modified feathers, it's not hair. It'll continue to grow throughout the bird's life, but just because of the height of the turkey, somewhere around 12, 13 inches is about max, because right in there they start to drag the ground and they start to get worn down just like rodents' teeth, except they get worn down faster than they can grow. So that's kind of the max when it comes to turkeys. Nobody, to my knowledge, has ever got a 16-inch beard. So if anybody ever says that, you need to check the water they're drinking, because I don't think that's true.
And one thing, just since you kind of brought up, a super long beard, one thing you will see is a very rare. It's certainly not as rare as a bearded hen, but you can occasionally, and there's a few that are harvested every year that have it, but they will actually have multiple beards. So they may have five or six. One of my first jobs out of college was actually trapping wild turkey, which is how I got in that fight that Curtis was talking about with a gobbler, and he spurred me. And we actually caught one that had seven different beards. Now, the vast majority of the time when you encounter a bird like that, you're going to have one main beard that looks thick, that's lush, that looks normal, and a lot of the other, beards beneath it are going to be very spindly, a little bit shorter, and not near as long in length. But it is uncommon to come across multiple beards, but it is something that every year or so somebody harvests one.
Yep, yeah, I've got a couple turkeys with multiple beards. It's always fun. And we did get one question about your turkey trapping, and yes, that he was trapping over bait piles with nets.
Yep. And so the way it works, now obviously when I was doing it, this was in 2012. So back in 1950s, the methods were a little bit different, but they were largely the same. And essentially, we would set out a bait pile with cracked corn. We wanted to use cracked corn so that we didn't have full kernels in their throat, so that if something happened, they didn't choke and die. So we used cracked corn, and we would basically set up a large net that's attached to rockets. And so we would hide in a blind when the birds hit the bait. And they were in a safe position, meaning their heads are all down and feeding. They're not up and kind of alert. We would launch the net. It launches over top of them and just kind of gently sets down on them. And then we go in, recover the birds, put them in a cardboard box. And the nice thing about a lot of wildlife, turkey specifically, we would put a black sock over its head. The second you remove its ability to have visual stimulus, it's almost this calming effect. You kind of see it the same with sharks, right? If you ever watched Shark Week back in the day, they flip the sharks over and they almost go to this kind of trance-like state. In turkeys, we would essentially do the same thing with just a black sock, just block off that visual stimuli, and they just completely relax and mellow out. So, yep, you're exactly right. Bait and large nets.
All right, and this slide just kind of a cool one to show, especially if you're ever out using archery method. This is a big thing because people just look at a turkey like, holy cow, that's a big old target. Okay, it looks like a big target, but a big percentage of birds that you see is just like feathers in air. It's like false advertisement. You think you're getting like a 30-pound bird for your table, but it's like full of air. There's like 15 pounds of meat in there. So Keep that in mind, especially if you're out there hunting with archery equipment. You do have to be precise, and a lot of times, what archery people are looking to do is the very top of the legs. If you can pin the very top of the legs into that body cavity, pin it into the ground, you know you're getting into some vitals and hopefully incapacitating that bird. Or one of the favorite shots is when it's fanned out and it's facing away from you, so that its eyes are blocked by its fan, and you can actually shoot the old kind of Texas heart shot, quote unquote, right where the tail fan comes together. That is actually a pretty good bullseye going straight through most of the most vital organs, and the bird can't see a draw. So think about that stuff if you're archery hunting. The volume there is not quite what it appears to be.
And one thing I want to kind of add, just because you kind of introduced the term when you were talking about taxonomy, and we'll certainly talk about it as we go into behavior a little bit later. But this term gallinaceous birds or galliforms is how they're classified. And so what that essentially means is they're ground dwelling and ground nesting birds. And so just think of the physiology of a bird that doesn't do a ton of flying, right? They're going to have a lot more musculature in these legs because they're again running on the ground a lot more. Their breasts are typically going to be their breast muscles are going to be more advanced, more developed than the birds that are typically, your Tweety birds that are on the wing very often. So they don't have a ton of wing meat, where the vast majority of that meat is going to be in these back legs and in the breasts.
Yep, and we mentioned this already, but you could be walking around, and some people will do this to try to find roost locations. Is just look for feathers scattered around next to some real mature trees. But all you got to do is find those feathers, and you can generally tell who left it. If you find that breast feather and it's got a real dark black tip, you know you're looking at a gobbler. If it's got a buffy tip, you know you're looking at a hen. Likewise, if you look down in the bottom portion of that picture, you can see how the adults on those primaries, they'll get blunted and rounded, especially on the toms that are displaying. Because when they're displaying, a lot of times the tips of their wing feathers will be dragging in the dust. Sometimes you can even see that track in the dust next to their footprint. Whereas the juveniles, much more sharp. Looks like you could cut a hunk of salami right with that feather. You know how sharp it is. The barring also is a way to tell. It's complete in the adults, and it's incomplete or really really narrow in the hen, especially towards the end of those feathers. And that's dealing with the last couple primaries there, P9 and P10. But even the scat, because the internal anatomy is a little bit different between the gobblers and the hens, you can just find a little hunk of poop and for the most part tell what it is. If it's a gobbler scat, they're going to generally be in the shape of a J. And that's easy to remember because Jake, right? Gobbler, Jake. Remember, if it's a poop that looks like a J, that comes from a Jake. And then the hens are coiled, just because of their anatomy in there. They got the oviducts and all the plumbing to release the eggs, so their scats come out coiled like that, curlicues.
And Curtis, you got a question. How does the size of the scat compare to, say, Canada goose?
I mean they're probably about the same
Pretty darn
size.
close. Yeah.
But the big difference between turkeys and geese is, and we'll talk about their digestion a little bit in more detail, but turkeys do hold on to their food longer than geese. A lot of people have heard the expression like crap through a goose, right? Geese, it goes through very, very quick. And so I feel like turkey scat is way more uniform, whereas goose scat is across the board, I feel like, but in general, size is probably about the same. Here's that digestion. So we got it all broken down here. Now, this is actually from a chicken on the right, but very similar. So just didn't have a great picture from a turkey. Same thing in a turkey. But remember, the main thing about birds, they don't have teeth. So they cannot chew their food like we do. They are just going to swallow their food whole. Now, birds have a crop. This is just basically a storage portion for food, so they can engulf a whole bunch of food quickly and worry about doing the process of digestion a little bit later when they retreat to safety. So crop can be a storage organ, can store all that food in it. From there, it's going to go into what is a two-part stomach. So they have a ventriculus and a gizzard. So the ventriculus is the glandular stomach. So this is like our stomach. This is where enzymes and stuff are going to work on food, and breakdown is going to start to occur. But in the gizzard, this is something we don't have. This is the muscular stomach. And so this will actually just grind their food. And this is the reason why birds will eat what's called grit. And grit is just really small rocks, pebbles, pieces of sand, pieces of anything they can find. It might be a piece of shot. That's why a long time ago they made it where we could only use non-toxic shot for waterfowl. They ingest this grit because it lives in their gizzard, and that is basically what replaces their teeth. That gizzard gets filled up with grit, and then it's really hard, strong muscle. It'll grind up all the food that's in there, and it's the same thing as chewing them. And from there, it can pass on into the small intestine, and from there, it's going to be similar to mammalian digestion. This is where a lot of the nutrients are going to get absorbed. Obviously, you've got liver, pancreas, spleen, gallbladder, all playing a part, producing different enzymes and stuff to help in digestion. You've got Sika there, which can help to especially absorb more water from the food that they eat. So a lot of these animals don't have to drink free water. They're really good at extracting it from the food they eat. And then whether it's a male or female, everything exits out of one opening, and so that's called a cloaca. And if it's a female, their eggs are going to come out of that same cloaca. That's why the scat shapes are different between the hens and the gobblers.
And I should have thought about this before we started, just to kind of add a cool little, I don't know. One thing I personally like to do, obviously, a lot of us like to eat the gizzards from our harvested birds. The it's a very interesting texture of meat because again, like Kurt, it's just a muscle that's in there grinding. Now, obviously, when you pull it out, you want to very clean it, wash it, get it good and cleaned. But what a lot of turkey hunters started to do, and I kind of fell in the same trap of it, is we keep a little glass jar that over time, after we harvest turkeys, we'll take out those gizzard stones and just keep them and put them on a shelf. And over time, you get this really neat mosaic that shows all the different kind of gizzard stones that different birds have picked up over the years. And just another cool little thing you can use to display and kind of remember the hunt. But I highly recommend if you're brand new to turkey hunting and you happen to harvest your first bird this year, give that gizzard a try. Give that gizzard a try. It's really tasty, really unique flavor. And obviously, a lot of people have eaten chicken gizzards, right? That's kind of a normal thing. So it's not too adventurous, but it certainly adds a little bit of meat to the harvest, and it's pretty darn good if I'd say so myself.
Yeah, like you said, it's a different texture, so it's
Mhm.
fun to have those fried gizzards, just a little different. And I keep the hearts and livers as well, so you get all kinds of different textures. And if you make dirty rice or jambalaya or something, oh, throw all
Got a
that in
question.
there.
Is it much like heart muscle? I would assume that question relates in terms of texture.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say no. I feel like the heart muscle's way more tender. For
Yes.
me, heart muscle's more like roast beef, whereas the gizzard's more like a cross between whatever meat you're eating and like calamari or something. That may be not the best, most appealing way to, but it's a more chewy. I mean, you can
It
even
is more
go to the
chewy is a
gas
perfect way to
stations
describe it. Yeah.
and get fried gizzards, because a lot of people just like that. And so I would say no, not like a heart at all. It's like its own thing. Not bad, just
Yep, I'm a big fan. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, here's we kind of showed you what that would look at like stretched out and what all the different parts are labeled. But here's what it is inside of a bird. And again, chicken, because wouldn't you know it, it's a whole lot easier to find good diagrams for chickens than it is for turkeys. But the layout is the same. You can see it's pretty packed in there. There's not a lot of space that's not being used. So, especially with a egg laying hen, when those oviducts start to swell and those ovaries start clunking off into there and start developing into eggs, that bird is just filled with all kinds of stuff. I mean, look at that, but still a lot more feathers than you think. So when you're out there archery hunting, top of the legs or right between the fan, which we'll have a shot later that'll kind of show you where that is. But notice kind of where all the different vital organs sit. Something like the heart in a turkey is so small and protected by the breastbone that it doesn't make sense to even try to aim for that. If you inadvertently hit it, great. Same thing with the lungs. They're up there so high that I mean, if you hit them, awesome. But if you aim for that, you're an inch away from missing the bird entirely. So that's why I like center mass, which is generally the very top of those legs, pinning them together, or the one from the back. Other than that, it's really hard to get a good shot with archery tackle when you're using a shotgun, which is what most people are going to use to turkey hunt. We're always aiming for headshots right where the head meets the neck, and good clean kill, quick, and doesn't ruin hardly any meat if done right. Back over to Dan, talk about some of these yummy foods that the turkeys eat.
Yeah, since we've talked about the digestive tract a little bit, we kind of know how things pass through the bird. I want to talk about feeding behavior a little bit. And one thing I want to really emphasize as we kind of go through this section is it's very seasonal, right? So you'll hear me use the term spring and summer and fall and winter, and just keep that in mind that these are seasonal animals that change their diet based on food availability as well as nutritional needs. Because think about what a turkey normally goes through in the fall and winter. There's not a lot of green browse. There's not a lot of insects around for protein and calcium and things like that. But as they get closer into spring and get ready for this breeding period, especially the hens, they really need to bulk up on that protein and stuff for egg development, for egg laying. And so a lot of this will be very seasonal, but we're really going to focus on kind of spring behavior, just because obviously that's what we're more interested in as hunters, and that's kind of what we can utilize for our hunt strategies. But one thing I want to emphasize right off the bat is 90% plant matter. And so when I first started getting into turkey hunting, a lot of the content at the time in the magazine articles and everything really talked about this insect component and how important it is and how to focus a lot of your effort in areas where you're going to find high insect diversity. And while that is very true, as we can see here, it makes up only about 10% of their diet, but that's very much on an annual basis. And so as we get closer and closer to spring, you'll actually see that grow. You'll see more insect diet. You'll see the plant diet start to come down quite a bit. But one thing I really want to emphasize right up front is a lot of the data that you're going to find. So I found this really cool study that was in the 1970s out of Illinois. A lot of this data is going to come from hunter harvested birds, right? And so what did Curtis say earlier? We're primarily shooting bearded birds. So in this case, pretty much their entire sample size was going to be males, right? So it's going to be gobblers. And so they basically took 95 gizzards and 106 crops and basically analyzed all of the contents of those gizzards and crops, and basically found that by volume about 97% of it was plant material, where only about 3.4% of it was animal matter. Which I do want to emphasize, a lot of people just focus on insects for the animal matter, but they will also occasionally eat snails. They'll eat slugs. They'll eat the occasional small snake if they can get their hands on it, if it's a little ringneck or a little brown decay eye snake, which I mean don't get but bigger than a big earthworm type thing. But what I really want to emphasize is again the seasonality of food and understanding that as a hunter, I think can be very, very advantageous. And so, obviously, in the fall and winter, they're very focused on the mast crop. So that's going to be our hickory trees, our acorns, our oaks. That's very much what they're going to be focused on because that's going to be the food available at the time. As things start to shift and the fall and winter comes, you'll naturally see well, this is what I think one of the coolest, and I should have put a slide on it just because, but we talk about it a lot in Turkey 101 and 102, is this winter kind of fall flocking structure of wild turkey. So during the fall and winter, you're going to see essentially all the birds come together and form these large wintering flocks, where in the spring, they're going to be a little bit more solitary. They're going to be in their own home ranges. And notice I'm using the term home ranges. Turkeys really don't have territories that they're defending, but they do have home ranges. And so you'll kind of hear me use that term throughout as opposed to territories. But this fall flocking behavior really allows them to focus on high quality feeding areas. Now, in Illinois, we are a very ag dominated state. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. And so, a lot of the diet you're seeing in the fall and winter from wild turkey, especially in Illinois and in the Midwest, is going to be primarily focused on waste grain. And so, as harvests go, there's always going to be a little bit of corn left over in a field, right? No combine is ever going to get 100% of it. There's always going to be in waste. There's always going to be waste grain, and that's going to be one of their biggest food sources during the winter. So much so that we were out on a controlled pheasant hunt a few weeks ago, probably mid-February at this time, and Jason and I were walking, looking for some squirrel action. And we came across a field that literally had a wintering flock of about 90 hens. And then just on the edge of that flock of hens, you could see about a flock of 20 Jakes and Toms all together. And so our theory was, well, that's where the food is at the moment. So you're going to see a lot of the fall wintering flock structure are going to just go where the food is available because that food at that point is going to be the limiting resource on the landscape. And so you're going to see the big flocks go after that. One thing I also want to emphasize, especially in the spring, and we talk about this a little bit in 101 and 102, is that we are essentially trying to reverse the process of normal courtship behavior for turkeys. In nature, what a tom is going to do, right? Curtis talked about how flamboyant the tom is, how much brighter their heads get, how that blood rushes through and really pops that color because they want to be flamboyant, they want to be showy, and they want to put on a display for hens to show, hey, I'm the dominant bird in this area, so come to me. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the biology of turkey. A tom wants to get in an area where he can be seen, and he's going to start doing his courtship display. He's going to be gobbling. He's going to be strutting. He's going to be showing off his stuff in the hopes that then the hens are going to come to him. For hunting, we're kind of doing the opposite, right? We're trying to almost emulate that we are either a hen or a tom with a hen, and we want to bring him into us. And so that can be a little bit more difficult. But one thing I have really started to implore that I think makes the process a little bit simpler is finding where the hens naturally want to be. The hens are going to largely dictate where that tom is going to be. And I know Curtis is going to talk about roosting in a little bit. That might fill in some gaps here a little bit. But primarily, a tom is going to want to roost where hens are going to be nearby, where hens are going to be feeding. So in the spring, I'm largely focused on areas where I expect hens to be. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that diet really shifts to high insect and high animal matter during this period compared to the fall and winter. And so I'm very heavily focused on areas that I expect to have high insect abundance. One of the best habitat types that you can come across in Illinois is if you find a prairie grass field that has been burned right before the spring. So one of our favorite prescribed fire times for habitat management is going to be right at green up, right when plants start coming back alive. And so it'll remove all that dead thatch, all those dead grasses, and you will just see the greens start to sprout and you will see an insect abundance that you haven't seen in a long time. And so if you're out on public land, you're liable to see a lot of these prescribed burn areas. Give those an extra look over. See if you find turkey sign in there. See if there's other habitat types, which we'll talk about, whether it's roosting, brood rearing nearby, to let you know that the hens are going to be there. But for me, that's what I'm really focused on the spring, and why I think it's so important to understand what turkeys are eating that time of year is so that I can position myself where the hens naturally want to be. And it makes pulling in that tom a little bit easier rather than, oh, I'm in the middle of somewhere where a hen wouldn't naturally be, and now I'm trying to act like a hen and convince this tom to maybe leave two hens that he's already got with him to come check me out. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, we did get one question just
Okay.
about what a turkey would eat in an open cornfield at this early time of year. One thing that I would say is keep in mind that sometimes they might just be displaying more
Mhm.
than eating. And if the cornfield is the best place to display, that might be their primary reason to be out there, is because they're wanting to display and also fight and start to break up. I'd imagine that food's getting pretty tough to come by in the cornfields right now, but there's probably little tidbits here and there, I would guess.
Yeah, that would be my assumption too. I don't know too much that they're, pulling out the cork stalk stubs and the roots out of the ground. They certainly occasionally will, so as will geese and as will a lot of birds. That is a certain food source. But like you, Curtis, I would imagine this time of year they're just in there getting in open areas. And as we start to talk about habitat a little bit, you'll start to realize how important I kind of set the stage at the beginning that turkeys are very specific in their habitat requirements. And that's because they need open areas. They need short grasses, but they also need tall grasses and tall vegetation for nesting. But they also need big mature timber to roost in and to feed in during the fall and winter. And so as this conversation progresses, I think that'll make a little bit more sense. But I just again really want to emphasize in spring, they're still focused on a lot of plant matter. But the hens and especially the poults, once they start to hatch, they're going to be very insect focused. Again, trying to get that protein, trying to, whether it's a poult trying to grow itself or the hen trying to provide nutrition for her egg development and egg laying. But one of the best food sources you can find on public land is literally, again, just one of these fields. It doesn't have to be burned. That's kind of why I'm coming back to this. I shouldn't have said just burned. You'll find areas where they disc. Essentially, what we're looking for is early successional disturbance. And so, what that means is if you were to let your yard naturally grow up, it's going to go through a process we call succession. Those grasses are going to start short, then the grasses are going to get tall. If you don't mow it over time, you're going to start to run into woody plants are going to start growing. You're going to start getting that shrub layer, that bush layer. Over time, another 10, 5, 10 years, you're going to start getting trees to start growing, and then the trees are going to go up. So essentially, every open field in Illinois almost essentially wants to become a forest again at some point. And biologists and land managers use disturbance to basically slow that process down and to reset that succession so that we can have this habitat that turkeys need. And if you think historically, well, how did that occur naturally? Well, we didn't have roads, right? And we didn't stop fire on the landscape. We had a lot of natural wildfires on the landscape and different flooding. We had different animals coming through grazing that created that disturbance. And so there was that natural disturbance. But as humans, we've basically removed that disturbance from the landscape. So we have to go back in and kind of manipulate the land to reset that succession.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about turkey vision. Now, that picture on the right, this is that shot if you're using archery equipment that some folks will wait for. If you get the bird displaying and it turns away from you, now you're able to draw your bow back. If there is not an obstruction like that tail fan between you and the bird's head, you are likely not going to get drawn back without that bird noticing something, because it's impossible to move. You think you can move slow and the turkey won't notice? They are way better at noticing movement than we are. So they can see all colors that we can, plus more. They can see into the UV spectrum. Turkeys have 6 cones for color vision. Humans, we only have 3. They have 6 cones. Some of those are for small wavelengths, some of those are for medium wavelengths, some of those are for long wavelengths. So they can see blues, greens, yellows, all the way into the reds. The only thing they can't see, like all warm blooded animals, they can't see into the infrared spectrum. That would be the cold blooded animals that can see into that, but they can see into the UV. Now, this is important to remember because do not wash your camo hunting clothes with any type of laundry detergent that has UV brighteners. They will glow like a light blue, and turkeys will pick you out quicker than if you were wearing no camo whatsoever. Definitely keep that in mind. Just like when you're deer hunting, turkeys aren't going to smell you, but using something like baking soda to wash your clothes is probably a good idea because it doesn't have UV brighteners in there. Also, one thing that I've kind of taken for granted, urine glows under UV. So you're not worried about the turkey smelling you, but you still don't want to be taking leaks right by where you hunt because that for a while is going to glow UV and could clue in a turkey to your presence. So something I haven't really thought about, but it definitely could happen. Now you can see here some of the numbers here. I mentioned the 6 cones. Turkey's got just one rod. This is going to be what's kind of more responsible for night vision. So turkeys are not 100% night blind. They can see a small amount, but their night vision is probably similar to ours or even worse than ours. They can't see very good at night.
Can I
And
jump
they
in
can.
real quick on that night vision comment?
Oh,
Just because
yeah. Go
I
for it.
think, and you'll probably hit it when you get to roosting, but just since you mentioned it, I think it's a really important point to when we talk about birds roosting. And so when we go out and scout for turkeys, a lot of us are doing what we call locator calling, right? We're out there calling, trying to locate where the bird is on the roost. We're putting it to bed so we know exactly where it's going to be in the morning. This is kind of why we need to essentially not get too close to those birds. If we get close enough to that roost that we startle those birds off of the roost, they largely really don't have the ability to get back up into the roost at night, and it's because of that one rod and such poor night vision. And so when you're out roosting, this is just kind of the conservationist in me talking. Try to stay as far away as you can. It's still being productive in your locator calling, but don't get so close that you risk bumping those birds off the roost because obviously they can't get back up to the roost at night. So not only does that open them up to more predation from a lot of our nocturnal predators, but also the temperatures drop a lot at night. The ground's going to be a little damp. It's going to be a little wet. So it also opens them up to potential hypothermia. So just keep that in mind when you're out locator calling.
Yep. And yeah, so visual acuity of turkeys, they say their visual acuity is about 60 to 20. So something that we can see clearly 20 feet away, they can see 60 feet away. So a good way to think of that is just their vision is probably 3 times better than what ours is, and they can see a long distance. They can also process imagery faster than we can, which is why you can't get away with movements no matter how slow. You need some sort of obstruction, and it's either got to come by the way of their fan or a tree because they have what's called monocular vision. Like most prey animals, the eyes are on the side of their head, which gives them a 270-degree field of view, which can actually even be increased by them turning their head to the side. So they can almost have a 360-degree field of view, see all around them, but that means they have extremely poor depth perception, very poor 3D reception. They can't tell the size of things, they have a hard time telling distance away from things. Now, birds try to mitigate this a little bit by bobbing their head, by constantly moving its head all over the place and changing that XYZ axis a little bit. It sort of helps them to triangulate and guess ranges and sizes and all that. But they are way, way worse at that than we are, but way better at pretty much every other aspect of seeing other than night vision and the binocular vision that predators have.
Got a question for you, Curtis. I'll kind of give my thoughts on it, then turn it over to you. It's a really good question regarding the Texas heart shot. Is exposure to fecal matter in turkey less of a concern than gut contamination in deer? The butcher in the butchering webinar seemed pretty adamant about cutting out potential exposure for food safety. So for me, I just kind of like to sum it up. I am always, always, always trying as much as possible to essentially trim out the wound channel for any harvest, whether it's a bird, whether it's a deer. I'm always trimming out that wound channel as much as possible on all sides, just to make sure that I limit the contamination and exposure as much as possible. And then I'm always giving that meat a really, really thorough wash as much as possible. So that's my concern is just always trimming out the wound channel, but I'll see if Curtis has any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. Same thing that I always do. And remember, this is with archery tackle. So if your main goal is preserving the meat, would highly suggest utilizing a shotgun. You're gonna have better odds that way. But if maybe you are in a place that you can't use a shotgun, maybe you have circumstances where you can't have a shotgun. Whatever the circumstance might be, if you're limited to archery equipment, or if you want to increase the challenge upon yourself, then that's just one of the little caveats you might have to deal with. But it would be a very small amount of meat wasted if you did happen to go through there and went through a little bit of the breast and you had to trim a little bit of that wound channel. I mean, you're going to be losing what, maybe 1% of your meat. Still probably worthwhile to take a shot that you're pretty sure is going to be efficient and reduce that animal to your possession rather than, I guess, taking another shot and trying to shoot somewhere else. It is just, if you're given that shot, it is a good one with archery equipment. I would not pass it up myself for that reason, but
Yeah,
those
and
are
like just to kind of close out this comment, like Curtis was talking about with their visual acuity, you will notice it at how much they wiggle and bob their head. And there's some really good archery shots out there where people have been successful at taking a headshot with archery tackle. I will tell you that is I've tried it and I've missed every single time and not even come close. So I gave up on it about 10 years ago. I was like, you know what? I'm done with that. I'm going to learn how to shoot these things a different way. And I've successfully shot two with my archery equipment, and it's because that head, it's always on a swivel, it's always bobbing up and down, it's always moving. So by far, if you have this shot opportunity with archery tackle, specifically vertical archery tackle, where you're actually having to draw your bow, you have complete seclusion from its head. It's not seeing you. You can get that movement, and you're still getting a really nice shot. But yeah, just go ahead and clean out the wound channels as much as you can.
Yeah, now I get into roosting a little bit. And there you see old Tom sitting in the roost in what looks like daytime, which definitely can happen, especially when we get rainy or windy days. They'll sit up there way longer than you think sometimes. But the main thing to remember is turkeys are going to roost each and every night. So they are going to fly up into a tree. And the reason they do that is because when you're a delicious little bird that's only got little daggers strapped to your ankles, you are susceptible to a lot of predation from a lot of different critters. And so their primary reason for roosting is probably for predator deterrence, also somewhat just access to resources, and to a smaller extent, probably thermoregulation. We'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide or two, but what turkeys want is they want very sturdy, tall trees so they can get away from danger. And remember, these turkeys can weigh up to around 25 pounds, so they want sturdy horizontal limbs. Generally, this makes it where it's not too hard to kind of find their roosting locations because in a lot of areas it's going to be the most mature, biggest timber that you can find, and they especially like timber that is in lowland areas with more topography than the areas around it, and they really like trees like white oaks. Well, one of these studies that actually came from southern Illinois, so we looked at a lot of different studies. Most of them are not in Illinois, but the data still kind of carries over. This one actually was from southern Illinois, and they looked at primarily roost trees. This was for hens they were looking at, and 51.2% were white oaks. So the other almost half was a mixture of sycamore, cottonwoods, maples, hickories, things of that nature. But about half of the trees selected were white oak, so that's always a good place to start. And here, the average DBH, which is the diameter of the tree at breast height, was 64 centimeters. And that's pretty similar with other studies I looked at as well. From other areas. That was the only one I found right from Illinois, but there were others from the southeast, and looks like the DBH there was 64 centimeters. No, 64 was for this one. The other one was 58 plus or minus 5.5. So right
Pretty
in
big
that
trees.
same neighborhood. Yeah, they're finding some of the biggest, sturdiest trees around for sure. And they do sometimes choose coniferous forests. And let's see. Well, let me talk through this one, and then I'll mention that. But so this study right here looked at the spatial roost networks and resource selection of female wild turkeys. So again, looking at females, and a lot of these studies where they're actually putting on vests or any type of radio transmitter type things on a birds, you're going to see that they're going after hens. The reason is just because capturing turkeys is very, very hard, and the survivability of toms, especially in hunting season, is going to be lower than the hens, which we generally can't take. So a lot of these studies are focusing on hens just because they feel like they can get more seasons with their backpacks, is my theory, but you'll have to ask the people running the studies, I guess. But it's pretty cool how, in this study, particularly looking at hens, they found a little higher site fidelity than expected. So, in general, in most of the studies looking at gobblers, where they roost, site fidelity is very low, which means they are using a different roost every single day. They are very, very rarely reusing roost. And the theory is with toms, this is to help to make them not predictable for predators and hunters. For the hens, they're still got relatively low site fidelity, but it is a little bit higher, especially in the egg laying period. And they think that that could be just because it makes them easier to find for the toms that they're trying to nest with. But in general, for our toms when we're hunting, site fidelity for roost trees is low, and there's great distance between the roost trees that they're picking. So this is good news and bad news. The good news is that each day is a new adventure. You might be hunting a piece of property and you haven't seen anything for 2 or 3 days. Keep going, because anything can change, and all of a sudden on day 4 or day 5, those gobblers that were a long ways off can all of a sudden be right in your lap. So keep at it. But then, of course, on the bad side, if you're on the turkeys, you need to strike quick while the getting's good, because they very likely are going to choose a new roost location in the subsequent days, and it might be a while before they're back in that same area to roost again. So hens might be in that area a little bit more frequently. Remember, they're not hunted. They've got to deal with all those predators out there, but they don't have the hunting season pressure that the gobblers toms have.
Do you happen to know offhand this mean inter-roost distance, what unit that's in?
I think meters.
Meters. Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually really that's surprising. That's cool. I love that. That's a lot further than I would have guessed.
Yeah, so they're definitely utilizing, and they're trying to keep the predators on their toes, not just the hunters, but the coyotes and the bobcats that are out there too. They don't want to get too predictable for those critters.
Yeah, and I'm sure, if they were to continue using a nest or the same roost over and over and over, it probably starts to just really build up odors and scents too, and just like you said, makes them that much easier to predate.
Yeah, and so here is an example map that they gave out there. So these were actual roost locations chosen by a bird. Again, these are hens, and they chose some of these roosts as hub roosts, some of these as satellite roosts, just by the proximity to each other and to different resources and all that. And we don't have to worry about that so much as just looking there and looking at all the different, these are basically all the different bedrooms for one single bird. So the moral of the story is that if you have a turkey season coming up and you go out 3 or 4 days before the season and roost a bird and think, okay, I'm golden, I'm on them, a lot can change every single day. So it's really important and really helpful to hopefully get a roost on that bird the night before you're hunting, or if that's not possible, early in the morning. That's going to tell you where he's at, much better than any information from 2 or 3 days ago. And just in general, turkeys tend to nest along riparian corridors. A lot of times, especially in Illinois, that's where our most mature timber is, and especially areas where you find more topographical ruggedness. Turkeys really want good, sturdy roost trees, but then they also want clear lines of sight for landing positions, and having some topography really helps them to do that. And they usually will fly down on the high side, which makes sense. Easier to see, easier to find a clear path, easier to fly down to.
And a lot of times, just this is anecdotal, but a lot of times what I've noticed is when I put birds to bed, a lot of times if I can actually watch them fly up to the roost, I don't want to put a number on it, but man, it seems like the vast majority of the time when those birds leave the roost, they're going to typically leave the exact same path they flew up. So if you're out there roosting birds and you happen to see those birds fly up actually to the roost, chances are they're probably going to hit that same spot when they fly down in the morning.
Yeah, good point. And I didn't include a slide on this, but I did check out a research study that was up at the northern extent of the range. The title was The Seasonal Roost Selection of Wild Turkeys at the Northern Range Edge. And so this is up in Canada. And they were specifically looking at how much of a factor maybe thermoregulation plays in where turkeys decide to roost. And so this comes back to that question earlier: do turkeys roost in coniferous trees? They absolutely did. What they found, they put data loggers in all these places, and the ambient average temperature was 13.2 degrees Celsius. In a coniferous tree, the average temperature was 13.9, so slightly warmer. And in the average deciduous tree, this is in the summer, it was 14.5 degrees. So it's actually considerably warmer in a deciduous tree than in a coniferous tree in the summer for whatever reason. And so turkeys will go back and forth, potentially maybe a hot day, maybe they're more likely to roost in a coniferous tree and vice versa in a deciduous. They didn't specifically look at that, but they basically found that it was not a big time determining factor, and turkeys were more selecting for tall trees and trees that gave them good safety from predators more than thermoregulation. So, if that was the case up in Canada, I'm sure that's even more the case in Illinois.
Awesome. Well, we'll move right into nesting, and I know we're stretched past an hour already, so we'll kind of move through this a little bit quick. But the reason I, especially as a turkey hunter, really want to understand turkey nesting behavior, turkey nesting habitat usage, turkey nest construction, all of the above, is because of how influential it is to where turkeys are going to be on the landscape in the spring. Like we talked about a few minutes ago, this concept of the fall wintering flocks. You will see a huge shift in a turkey's immediate location as it goes from this fall winter flock as we get closer and closer to the spring. And so personally, I got an email today actually asking some tips and techniques for scouting for wild turkey on public land. And at this point, I'm not even doing a ton of scouting. If I were to do scouting, I would be very much focused on looking at habitat more so than looking for sign, because we're still at that point of the seasons that we haven't necessarily seen that huge shift where turkeys start to kind of naturally gravitate towards their more kind of spring home ranges. They're very much still in these fall wintering areas. And this is one of the biggest habitat indicators that you can find is good nesting structure and good nesting habitat, because that's what the hens are selecting their home range for. And where are the toms and the gobblers and jakes going to be? They're going to be where the hens are. So, what I want to emphasize right up front is go back to this term that Curtis introduced at the very beginning, gallinaceous. So, these birds are ground nesting. A lot of our birds in Illinois will nest up in trees. Turkeys are not. They're going to nest on the ground. And so, there's a couple very key things to keep in mind, especially in terms of habitat. Now, when I first started to get into turkey hunting, everybody said, "Oh, they need prairie grasses. They need prairie grasses. You have to nest in prairie grasses." And they certainly can, and they certainly do, and they certainly will. But you do not necessarily have to have a large prairie grass field nearby to have good nest success and to have a bunch of turkey hens in their nesting. A lot of what I have actually started to run across, and the more you turkey hunt, chances are you're eventually, especially if your season is in, segment four, later on in the year, segment four, segment five, when those turkeys are actually starting to incubate a nest, you'll occasionally be walking through an area and you will flush a hen off a nest. It naturally happens. And one thing I've started noticing more and more and more on some of the pieces of public land that I hunt is that they're actually not necessarily selecting the nest location for the prairie. They're more selecting it for kind of this natural fence row, hedgerow that just becomes overgrown, that may separate two fields, right? So it's got some tall trees in it, but it's also got a really nice understory of native vegetation that's not necessarily grasses, but it's thick. It provides good insect abundance, and it provides, again, the vertical structure that a hen really needs to sit on the nest. So you can find nests virtually almost everywhere, but you want to really find them again in these really kind of mixed forest story areas or prairie grasses where you have really nice vertical structure. Because one thing that's important to think of is, yes, there's a lot of predators on the ground. There's also a lot of avian predators they have to protect from. And so that nest needs to have a little bit of vertical structure to help protect it from some of those avian predators. Now, it'll take about 2 weeks for a hen to lay her full clutch of eggs, which is normally about 9 to 13. At the end of that laying period, she's immediately going to start incubating that nest, and she will incubate it for about 28 days. And she's going to sit on that nest all day, and she will move every hour or so to kind of reposition the eggs, rotate them a little bit, change her position. She'll go off, feed a little bit, and then she'll come back. But she's really going to sit on that nest the vast majority of the day. But again, what I really want to emphasize again is that need for vertical structure and that need for, if you're in, we've all probably walked through bottomland woods, right? Where there's just virtually nothing in the understory. It's just bare dirt with a lot of leaf litter and big sycamore trees surrounding. While that might make good roosting habitat, it certainly doesn't make good nesting habitat. So you want that really thick understory layer that they can get in, claw out a little depression in the soil, and begin kind of constructing their nest. What I have found to be actually more influential to where I can predict where turkeys are going to be on the landscape is this concept of brood rearing habitat. And so nesting habitat has become a little bit more prominent on the landscape, especially on public lands, as they're doing a lot more habitat management that again is resetting that succession stage that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier and allowing a lot of that understory to continue to grow. If we were to just let it to grow to a mature forest and never work the understory, it's eventually just going to become overshaded and you're not going to have a ton of really nice vegetation on the forest floor. And so we're starting to see a lot more nest habitat on the ground. But one thing that is still fairly limiting, especially on public land, is this concept of brood rearing habitat. So I want you to think how small a turkey is when it hatches out of an egg. It's a very small bird. And so it is very difficult for that small bird to navigate through some of the thicker habitats like we talked about that they need for the nesting area. A lot of times they're not going to be brood rearing in those areas. They want more open areas that allows especially young birds to easily find seeds on the ground and easily find insects, 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 insects. They're very commonly going to be focused on insects this time of year, the poults will be. So the reason I like to talk about this concept of brood rearing habitat is because, again, research has shown that a hen will select her home range based on a few factors. One, the availability of males, which the males are usually going to come wherever she is. So check mark there. Nesting habitat, so a really nice understory layer that she can build that nest in, and brood rearing habitat. She wants to have all of those contained in a very close home range that allows her to brood rear or to rear this brood without having to navigate too much country and expose them more to potential predators, right? So, um, a lot of times you're going to see on Illinois public land, it's going to be burned areas are very common brood rearing habitats. There are some states that have started disking. So right before they expect a lot of the turkeys to begin nesting, because we don't want to disturb these habitats while there's actually birds nesting in there. And so that's kind of why I talked about this burn season that usually occurs right now. There's a lot of prescribed fire going on in the landscape. Well, not today because it's been raining all week, so it's hard to light a fire. But this time of year is really good because none of those birds are technically on the nest yet. And so you're still outside of that nesting period. You're not going to damage any nest, that type of thing. So keep that in mind. Look for brood rearing habitat. It's more open habitat. It can be open fields. It can be as simple as a logging road or an ATV trail coming through the forest. If you're in an area that just doesn't have a ton of open habitat nearby, look for some of those forest openings that either naturally occur as a tree falls down or that have been man-made, whether it's an old logging road, whether it's an ATV trail, things like that. Just easy areas where you can envision a very small bird to walk around, not get its feet tangled, and be able to find seeds and insects. That's key to finding really good brood rearing habitat. And so I want to show this graph because I thought this was a very interesting way to represent seeing that diet change as the poults begin to grow. And so you'll see when they first hatch, they're very insect and animal matter focused. But as they continue to develop and develop, they'll switch more off of that insect and animal matter and switch more to plant material. And so you'll naturally see as the seasons progress. And obviously, when we're talking 5 to 8 weeks after hatch, the turkey season is close at this point. So it's not hugely relevant for us as hunters, but you'll naturally again see them shift areas. If they're in an area where there's not a lot of green browse available, you'll start to see that brood shift to maybe an open clover field or one of these burned areas rather than an area that's super high insect abundance. So really cool stuff. I want to quickly go over the poult timeline because I just find this really interesting to know. So week one, after they hatch, they're going to start to begin to learn the hen's alarm vocalizations. And that's basically the first thing that these young poults get to pick up on. And it kind of makes sense logically, right? They need to know when she senses danger so that they know to hide, they know to run, that type of thing. And throughout week one, they're going to start mimicking just about everything the hen does. She's going to essentially teach them how to feed just by pecking at different food sources. I've seen videos of them trying food source and realize, oh, I can't peck that. That's a log. And they'll go to another. I can't peck that. Oh, I can peck that. And so they'll start to develop some of these behaviors. And what's really interesting is towards week one, you'll see them start to dust. So this is a way that they essentially clean themselves. And Curtis kind of talked about it a little bit when he was talking about some of the tom wing feathers that you can kind of see scratched off from when they're strutting. You can also see some of that wear on toms as they dust a lot. But that'll be occurring in week one. In week two, they'll start to develop the ability to fly. It won't be a huge flight. It'll be very short bursts that are basically just predator avoidance. Oh, there's a predator here. We need to flush and fly and just try to run away as far as we can. By week three is when they're finally going to start being able to get up to the roost trees. Now, they are going to very much select shorter, smaller trees because they still don't have the ability to get way up at the top on some of those bigger limbs, like some of the toms will. They'll be on kind of the lower limbs, but they will begin starting to roost by kind of week three. In week six, this is has been described by a lot of the scientific literature as kind of the great filter. If the poults can make it past week six, that's when they have a much greater chance of survival. Pre week six, they are open to just a wealth of predation, a wealth of weather events, all kinds of things. So making it past that week six mark is a really important kind of timeline for a poult, and they will begin showing sexual dimorphism. Like Curtis talked about, the body size differences between a male and a female turkey is very distinct. Obviously, how they physically look is very distinct. And about week 13 to 14, you'll start seeing those signs, basically visual for us to see. Now back to the brood rearing habitat a little bit. I kind of summarized all this a little bit, but one thing I really want to emphasize is, especially in Illinois, we have a ton of a habitat type called edge. Edge is essentially the intersection between two habitat types, and you will hear us talk about edge for just about every game species that we talk about or have workshops on or hunt. And that's because game species are very typically edge species. And why is that? Well, when you have two habitat types coming together, not only do you have structural differences in the habitat, but it's also largely a lot more diverse. There's going to be a higher insect abundance. You're going to have higher plant material, and you're going to have a better composition of plants. And so, what I like to look for if I'm in an area that I can't find really good brood rearing habitat, a lot of times it's just going to be that forest edge. That forest edge, especially in Illinois, as we have what we like to call a very hard edge. So we have this concept that land managers use where they edge feather, right? And so instead of going from an open field to a big forest, they want to basically taper it and have, grassland to shrubs to small trees to big trees. In Illinois, we really don't have that. We have a lot of very hard edges, and those hard edges do make pretty good brood rearing habitat for wild turkey. And one kind of last thing I want to talk about in terms of the brood rearing is how you can get involved. And so this is something that I have personally been doing for basically ever since I've lived in Illinois. I don't necessarily make it a point to like go out and try to do this, but I do a lot of hiking and stuff in the during the brood rearing period. And so if you're out on Illinois public land or on private land when you're out and about at the right time of year, so basically June through August. Keep this in mind. This is a way that we can provide extra data because, again, like Curtis and I have mentioned, a lot of the data and stuff that's coming, especially on food and on diets and on some of the hens and stuff, a lot of it is just not. There's not a huge sample size, right? It's very expensive to capture a lot of turkeys. It's very expensive to monitor a lot of turkeys. So this is a citizen science way that we can get involved and provide some really good data to DNR that they can use to inform management decisions. And so historically, it used to be a physical postcard, which made the process very daunting for us as the public to be able to report broods, report what we see. Now they actually have an online reporting system that you can do it immediately from your phone or from your computer. But one thing that's really cool is they've started to standardize this across states. So a few years ago, there was basically a turkey study group meeting that brought all the Midwestern states together, and they wanted to compare a lot of these data sets. What does your poults per brood look like? What does your poults per hen look like? And what they found is their data collection methods were so different that they actually really couldn't logistically compare it. It wasn't apples to apples. It was very much apples to oranges. And so they've essentially developed a new process to where all these states are collecting the data and collecting the same data in the hopes that we can start to compare different states. So it's really cool science and a great way to get involved. And what's really cool is they also publish this data for us to play with, for us as hunters and the public to look at. Now, I just basically took a screenshot here of the data dashboard that they've built for this project. It allows you to really dive into it. I just kind of wanted to quickly highlight what all you can see. But one thing I want to really point out is that 90% of this data from this data dashboard is from citizens or volunteers. So this is again us as conservationists, us as hunters, us as wildlife enthusiasts being able to basically impact turkey management just by providing them clean, nice, and useful data. So if you're out in the woods or out in, hunting, hiking, getting ready for deer season, maybe you're putting up some deer cameras to try to pick up some summer activity. Maybe you just want to go look for some late season mushrooms. Keep this in mind if you're out, June through August. Download the link or bookmark it on your phone. Really easy reporting system, but again, the more data, the better. So definitely something to be aware of. So last thing I want to quickly touch on, I know again we're running a little late here, is the National Wild Turkey Federation. So I'm a huge fan of the National Wild Turkey Federation, just like just about every game species that we can hunt. There's groups dedicated to the conservation, the preservation, and the stewardship of these species. And I just love the National Wild Turkey Federation's logo, save the habitat, save the hunt. And I think it's really indicative if we think all the way back to how we started this conversation, how in the early 1900s through the 1950s, we didn't have a darn turkey in this state. And now we harvest, well, anywhere between 16 to 17,000 each spring. That really puts it into perspective how important conservation and putting habitat back on the ground. And largely, a lot of the groups that were leading this effort back in the day were groups like the National Wild Turkey Federation. So, huge plug to them. I'm affiliated with our local Champaign County chapter. So, if you're in the Champaign County area and you want to reach out and help us out, give me a shout. But one thing I do want to mention is we get a lot of people who are just, oh, I don't know any other turkey hunters in my area. I don't really know how to get started. I just want to have somebody to bounce ideas off of. And while we are always here to help and always happy to help, sometimes it's helpful just to have somebody in your local area. And one thing I want to emphasize is that the way the NWTF is structured is they actually have chapters in almost every county in the state. And if it's not one in your exact county, they have one that kind of covers that county. So you can find like-minded individuals who care about turkey, who care about turkey hunting. And I'll tell you what, a lot of these guys are hardcore turkey hunters that have been hunting since it came back in the 1970s. And I'll kind of close with the story. I'm at going to an NWTF banquet a few years ago. I just got to talking to a guy sitting at my table, and he told me that he has harvested in his life 17 Grand Slams and 5 World Slams. And so if you start to do the math on that, this man has harvested more turkeys than most people see in their life. And so the wealth of knowledge and information I was able to just be able to pick his brain was fascinating. And so highly recommend check out the National Wild Turkey Federation. Great group. You're going to meet some great people. And again, great way to just meet like-minded people and give back a little bit. I don't know if you have anything to add to the NWTF, Curtis.
No, good stuff. Definitely joining groups like that not only helps with conservation, but it really helps plug you into kind of the social pipeline of hunters and springboards you into having friends to hunt with and likely new areas to hunt as well. So, especially if you not only sign up, but you agree to help. Some of these organizations have had the same few people doing the
Yeah.
same jobs for a decade, and if a new person comes in and asks to help, man, they'll be giving you all their best hunting spots and secrets. They'll be so happy just to have somebody to help them do stuff. So don't sleep on that.
And last thing I'll mention, they are in full banquet season right now. So I know our banquet here, again, I'm the Champaign County banquet chair for our Champaign County chapter. Our banquet was at the end of January, but I know there's basically been multiple banquets every single weekend since ours. Ours was the first one of the year at the end of January, but basically throughout the entire until summer, there's banquets all the time. And again, great way to meet like-minded people. And I'll tell you, it's a great way to score some really nice hunting equipment too. So I'll just do a quick little show and tell. At our banquet, I won this little new chest turkey rig. So instead of, having to get a big turkey vest, I got this little pack that holds all your calls, all kinds of stuff. Really nice. So again, great way to meet like-minded people, but also potentially walk away with a lot of really nice gear.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dan mentioned it. We're also here to help, so you can look us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can go to YouTube, and we've got, at this point, just dozens and dozens and dozens of unique webinars that are all Illinois specific. So if you're interested in more than turkeys, there's a good chance that we've got something already out there available that can help you out. And we're posting new stuff all the time, so follow us on Facebook or sign up for our newsletter, and you'll be the first to find out about all of our upcoming in-person hands-on workshops and Illinois specific webinars like this.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize again, obviously, thanks for coming out tonight. If you're interested in learning more, we have, like Curtis mentioned, we have a ton of webinars and in-person events coming up. We have a big one at Moraine Hills upcoming on this Saturday. That one was sold out, but I just logged in and see we actually do have a spot left open. So one spot opened up. We have 49 out of 50 register for that one. So if you're interested in a Moraine Hills State Park Learn to Hunt Spring Turkey Workshop, where instead of us just sitting here talking, it's going to be a lot more hands-on. We're going to bring a bunch of calls. We're going to simulate the roosting activity. So we're going to go and basically act like we're roosting a bird. We're going to talk through that process. We're going to go through decoy placements and strategies, calling strategies, and we're also going to bring along some wild game and make a little lunch. But we've got that workshop on the 7th that, again, we have one more spot for. On the March 14th, we have a workshop at Coon Creek Hunt Club, Learn to Hunt Turkey Workshop, which is over near the Rockford area. We have another webinar on March 17th, which is going to be shotgun shell and choke selection. So we're really going to dive into the nuances of what all the different numbers on a shotgun shell box mean. There's trade-offs as you adjust one number, it's going to take away from the other. So understanding shotgun shell and choke selection webinar on March 17th. And then we've got some more Learn to Hunt Turkey workshops March 21st at Clinton Lake State Recreation Area, which is just a little bit west of Champaign. And then we also have one in the Springfield area at St. Chris Lake State Park on March 28th. And then also on March 28th, if you happen to be in the Chicagoland area, we will be at the Sitka Gear store in Vernon Hills. It's kind of a unique event. We're going to be doing a wild game processing event. So we're going to bring a lot of different game. We're going to bring pheasants, quail, a few ducks, some squirrels, and some other things, and show how to completely process those, get them, food ready for your freezer. And while we're doing that, we're also going to cook a little bit of wild game, but there's also going to be a deer taxidermy demo. So Sitka is bringing in a taxidermist who's really well known for doing really high quality deer mounts. And as we're doing our demonstrations and our workshop, he's going to be doing some taxidermy, and then he's going to open it up and he's going to be doing some demonstrations. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Sitka is going to give away what sounds like a lot of gear that day too. So if you're looking for something fun on March 28th to kind of get you in the mood for the turkey season, which starts very quickly, definitely check out all of our events coming up. And we're always adding to it. We're always planning, so we'll have more to post here shortly.
Yeah, and in that same vein of learning more, one thing that we should mention is one of the main ways that we do research for this, other than looking at all of the tools on IDNR's webpage, is I like to use Google Scholar.
It's the best.
So
It's the
if
best.
you've never used that before, you can just go on Google and type in Google Scholar, and then you're going to get to a search engine that's just going to search within scientific publications. So you can type in your keywords that you want. Like, for example, I could type in Eastern Wild Turkey Roost Site Selection Illinois and see what comes up. And guess what? Only one come up, and it's the nesting ecology, survival, and home range of wild turkeys in an agricultural landscape by Delahunt. Did his work out of Southern Illinois University Carbondale. It's we quoted that one a couple times on there, but you can go read that on Google Scholar for free. You can check it all out. Got some cool stuff in there. We obviously didn't go through all of it. Just for some key takeaways: mean nest success rate 19.8%, so not extremely successful. But the hens were producing 11.3 plus or minus 3.3 poults per hen. So even though low success, they are big time R strategists. They're trying to produce a lot of poults, and hopefully some of them are going to make it.
And so just to close out, again, thanks for coming tonight. I dropped one more link in the chat to the Illinois Outdoor Journal, or the Outdoor Illinois Journal, sorry. If you're just interested in learning more about wildlife, it's a quarterly online publication that puts out articles once a quarter. But what's really cool is a lot of them are written by Illinois DNR biologists, are written by people who study and understand these things at levels that for a lot of us, we just don't have time to, right? And so if you go to that Outdoor Illinois Journal, you can also search for wild turkey, and you can find all the articles written about wild turkey. You'll probably find some of Curtis and I's as we talk about turkey hunting. You'll find a lot of articles from Luke Garver, who's the turkey biologist for the state. You'll find IRAP articles that reference turkey. So if you've never heard of the Outdoor Illinois Journal, check it out, and definitely keep checking it out once every quarter or so. I can't remember when the next issue came out, but I know the last one just dropped in February, so it'd be 3 months after that. Can't do the math right now; it's a little hard. But yeah, really, really good source for, again, just a little bit more information. Always a lot and it transcends wildlife too. There's a lot of fisheries articles there. There's a lot of land articles there. So if you're just interested in learning how DNR manages land, or what you can do as a landowner to manage your land better, there's articles that cover the entire plethora of basically natural resources in Illinois. So definitely give the Outdoor Illinois Journal a check if you haven't yet. Really, really good stuff. Awesome. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and conclude tonight. Again, thanks for joining us tonight, and thanks for sticking with us till the end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and hope you learned something new. And again, this is the a first time for us doing this specific webinar. So if you have any feedback or comments, feel free to shoot an email or drop it in the YouTube chat once I post this recording to YouTube. But I'll probably post it tomorrow, and I'll send you guys all a link to view that if you're interested. Any last words, Curtis?
Nope. Good luck, everybody. Hopefully, we'll see some of y'all at workshops or maybe in the turkey woods. Who knows?
And hey, if you search Turkey on Outdoor Illinois Journal, our article just dropped February 2nd. So this is a new article talking about how to hunt the Shawnee National Forest for turkey. So if you didn't draw a tag yet, there's still options, and that article can give you a little head start there. Last plug. All right, thanks everybody, and have a good evening.
See ya.